Are you a woman in the corporate world striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cece George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, imposter syndrome expert, and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time.
Hello, and welcome back to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Hey, Rachel, what's going on?
Hello, lovely Cece. So nice to see you, as always. Well, let's see what's going on. Well, as you know, I'm in the UK, so I just spent a week with my best friend from university in Essex, Terry. We did quite a few cool things, actually. One of my favourites was going to a beach hut on a very busy beach by the Thames, which is so far removed from being in Sydney, but hilariously British. And then
Nice.
going around on bike rides and having beers and looking at all the really, really massive houses where she lives. So that was kind of fun. And, and then I just spent a few days in the Isle of Wight with my parents for their 55th wedding anniversary.
Wow. Congratulations to your parents.
Yeah, I know. So we did a lot of looking at old houses and castles, and like you do in England, because it's very old here, and mostly like so Osborne House, where we went to, is the favoured place of Queen Victoria. It's gorgeous, actually. So I highly recommend going there if you ever come to the Isle of Wight.
Wow. Well, it's definitely on my list. We have some family in London, not London proper. They're probably more toward the suburbs, but it's definitely on the travel itinerary. All of that sounds amazing. Just to have time to catch up with friends and family and exploring the world. It's all things that I love to do so much. Interesting that you talk about all the travel, because we were also traveling recently. We were visiting my family in Chicago, which is one of my favorite cities because of the people who live there. So shout out to the Windy City. But it was a crazy trip getting back, though. There was some severe weather in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area. So our flight was diverted. Instead of going right to New York, we were sent to Washington, D.C. And we were stranded there by the airline for 7 hours with no meal voucher, no hotel accommodation, and no information. Literally, the gate agents had left their posts. No one was there to field any of the concerns from us passengers. Yeah, we eventually made it back yesterday morning at 5:30, and we were supposed to come back on Sunday afternoon. So a little bit crazy.
Yeah, that's awful. And airports do bring out the worst in people, don't they? So I can't imagine that was
Oh, yeah. Actually, one of the passengers that we were just sharing our misery with, she was on the way back from Paris Fashion Week, and she was about to go ballistic on the gate agents, but there were none. So she had nowhere to put her anger. It was really interesting. But recently I actually wanted to share this with you. I came across a really interesting video on Instagram that essentially was talking about psychological safety and how a lot of what we want to say goes unsaid because psychological safety hasn't been established.
Were you
And the
thinking
reason
about that
why,
when you were stuck in the airport?
yeah, right.
Listen,
I
you
had a
poor
lot,
staff, they're about to get attacked by everybody.
I definitely had a lot to share. I just wish I had someone to share it with. But that video in particular, it made me think back to the times where I might have wanted to speak up about something, but I held back because I was afraid I would be judged or misunderstood or even penalized for sharing those thoughts. And I talk about that in terms of both at work and in some personal relationships as well. Is that
Mm.
something that you've ever felt before or experienced before?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like many, many times. Yeah, I mean, talking about from my home life right through to my career, that's been a bit of a theme, right? And obviously, I guess it depends on who
Mm.
you're working with. I don't know about other industries, but I do feel advertising didn't really have a good reputation for creating safe work cultures. Obviously, that's something they've been working on, but I don't know how quickly they're making that change. It's definitely still there for me.
Right. Yeah, and honestly, I've never worked in the advertising industry, so I don't have that direct experience, but I could imagine that generally the culture is just very cutthroat, so
Mhm.
psychological safety may not be on everyone's priority list, right? So let's start off by defining what psychological safety is, or psych safety for short. Psych safety is that feeling that you have when you can share your thoughts, ideas, and feelings without the fear of some type of negative consequence, like being judged or retaliated against.
Mhm.
And I remember learning about psych safety just about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And shortly after that, I was at a conference in Boston and I had a chance to meet basically the founder of this concept, Amy Edmondson.
Oh, cool.
For all of you listeners who aren't familiar with Amy's work, she is a professor at Harvard Business School, and she came up with the idea of psychological safety.
Mm.
So, according to her definition, it means creating a work environment where people feel comfortable speaking up and taking risks without fear of being judged or punished. And her research shows that when people feel safe to share ideas and make mistakes, that teams perform better and come up with more, innovative solutions. So for all of you who are interested, you can read more about her research and this concept in her book, The Fearless Organization. I even bought her book at the conference just so that I can meet her and take a photo. Total star moment for me. And yes, I know I'm a big nerd.
Yeah, but everyone does that, don't they? I mean, I've bought books at conferences before just to get a photo with the person who wrote it. It's you kind of get caught
Right?
up in that a bit, don't you?
Yes.
I think it's fascinating, though, the fact that we have to establish psychological safety as something that we need to create. I think that's a little bit concerning. I mean, it should actually be a given, but we live in a world
Mm.
where power wins and people in their egos can use their power for the wrong way, in the wrong way, unfortunately. So, yeah, we do have to talk about psychological safety.
We do. And, psychological safety, yes, it's not the cultural norm. I
Mm,
mean, of course, it's more common in today's workplaces, but there are still so many teams, even within the same organization, where employees don't feel safe enough to express themselves.
mm,
And in this Instagram video, it made me think back to the different work environments I had been in and the different cultures that the leaders who led those departments had set for their teams. There were unfortunately more environments where psychological safety was clearly missing. And the few that I worked in where psych safety was established, well, it was just clear from the leader at the beginning that they valued their employees' opinions and wanted them to speak up. So clear difference right there.
mm. I mean, I do think that you can work in a toxic company or a culture of it in a toxic company that where a specific department or leader or team leader does work to have that psychological safety within that particular team, and vice versa. You can have a great company culture, and there can be one person in a particular team who doesn't promote psychological safety. So I think it really does depend on the personality of the leader as a whole of the business, and also in particular departments.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, psych safety, or I would say feeling that you are safe,
Mm,
definitely depends on the environment that the leadership creates.
yeah,
In fact, there was one particular workplace that stands out for me, and I'll share this to highlight the importance of psych safety.
yeah.
A while back, while working on a project with the team I was on, there was a manager in particular who constantly spoke over me in meetings. And actually, not just me, that was the general MO of this
Mhm.
leader. And whenever I tried to share what I was thinking,
Mm.
that manager would say things like, well, that's not right, or we're not going to consider that as an option.
Oh.
So naturally, I lost the impetus to share going forward. And on the
Mm.
next performance review, get this, I was dinged because I wasn't vocal enough. On top of that, the project moved forward without incorporating my input. And it later came out that alternate options like mine should have been explored because of the waste of time and effort that came later. Can you believe that?
I mean, yes, I can. That has happened to me too, a similar type of thing. Um, but it's incredibly frustrating. I mean, I can certainly relate to many experiences like that across my career. It's awful.
Oh, I'm sure you can. You have doozies for stories. So, yes, it's extremely frustrating, upsetting, all the things. I mean, come on. It felt like a lose-lose situation to
Mm,
me. And that's just one example of how not speaking up can cost you,
mm.
because it can definitely cost you in terms of time, money, and resources. And in that whole time, I never once felt like that manager valued my input or even wanted to hear it. So I became more quiet. And when I did, it was held against me. So,
Yeah. I mean, also, by doing that, you're kind of suppressing your talent, and therefore you have underperforming staff
mhm.
who don't produce, and then then they leave, and then you've got to replace them, and that's more cost to the company, etc., etc. It goes on, doesn't it? I mean, and
It does.
I really feel you on that one. I mean, I do think, like in my early career, I was a bit more bold about sharing my ideas, and
Hmm.
a bit more confident and out there, and I've got something to say, like which could easily be quashed. I know.
You know.
Yeah, no. In my very first agency, actually, I think they were quite pioneering in creating that environment where ideas and opinions should and could be shared. And actually, I kind of, when we were thinking about this episode, I was really reflecting on that actually, because I hadn't thought about that agency for a long time, but I do remember really
Mm.
enjoying being there, and this, the staff were really open to the fact that I was very enthusiastic when I first landed there. And I was on the reception actually when I first got there.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, this is so late 90s as well, but the managing director had this thing called open surgery, right?
Oh,
It's so advertised. It honestly, just to give it some wanky name like that. But anyway, and I rang up his EA, and I said, "Can anyone book a time for Nigel's surgery?" She's like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, even me?" She said, "Yes, you can."
I love that.
So I like fully booked a time and went to talk to him, and I was extremely bold about sharing what I wanted from my career there. So, I was given that carte blanche to talk openly, and even in meetings as a junior burger when I did move up from reception. I never
Sure.
felt like I was being shot down for my ideas. So that was actually quite a good place to work. But
Hmm.
then I went on to my second agency in the UK again. A similar thing. A lot of my ideas were listened to and implemented. But when I moved to Australia, different story. Where's the
No. That's interesting though, what you taught the culture you experienced in the UK
yeah.
versus now the culture in Australia. Go on,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, I found that quite shocking too. But At the time, I was a skilled migrant, classed as a skilled migrant, because
Oh, migrants.
yeah, I know. And yeah, I know. Because of my skills in advertising, and they were kind of building up their marketing, you know, talent base, I guess. But some
Sure.
of my experience in ad agencies in Australia have been nothing short of horrific, really. I worked in a lot of places. We do tend to move around in the industry, and as I have mentioned before, I have been made redundant a few times, which
Hmm.
is also very much part of the culture. So,
Oh,
people kind of expect to get made redundant. So, it because advertising obviously relying on clients and they move, and then you go up and down and people move around. So, but
sure.
so it does lack a bit of element of safety because of that, and because it really can happen any minute. It's quite a volatile industry like
Right.
that. So I really think I've only had like 1 to 2 great experiences where I felt safe, and both of those times were with the same creative leader, my good friend Cam, if he's listening. Exactly.
Shout out.
So yeah, but I can't say I felt safe to share a lot of my ideas in most places I've worked, despite being often brought in to develop, workflow processes, systems to keep the team productive and functioning, which is something
Hmm.
I'm very good at actually. That's kind of my thing. But I've also always felt like I've had some sort of roadblock or deep criticism that was borderline bullying. And
Mm.
and let me just say, this may not be normal for everybody, but it certainly was for me. But this was 100% from female bosses who,
Ah,
yeah, who have actively stood in my way, sidelined me, cut me down, even made active moves to have me removed from the businesses, which turned out to be those redundancies. And
mhm.
unfortunately, that's been my reality, which is why I decided, enough. I'm going to go out on my own and start my coaching business.
Right. Well, I mean, at least you turned all of those disappointments into creating something better for yourself. I mean, that's how I see it. And that's, I think there's so much empowerment just right there. But,
Mm,
what you're describing is actually reminding me of something you said earlier
mm,
when you don't feel safe enough to speak up, you're actually stunting someone's and holding someone's talent
yeah,
from really coming out. And I think that's probably the biggest risk factor when
yeah.
you don't have a psychologically safe environment. And I'm sorry, we have to go back to that female comment. What is the deal with women sidelining other women? We're
Mm,
supposed to be lifting as we climb, aren't we? Is it
yeah.
intimidation? Is it jealousy, fear, insecurity? What is it? I'm always baffled by that.
I honestly don't know, but unfortunately for me, and I know this isn't for everybody. Like it might be very isolated to. So there's going to be people here listening who have also experienced this, but it does seem to be a common theme in my particular career path,
Hmm,
and I don't know what that is about. I wish I knew. I could
I
solve it.
know.
Yeah.
There should be a support group for women who are experiencing this, which
I'm
actually exists.
starting it. Yeah.
Welcome to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch support group. But there's really a theme here about the
Mm,
consequences when you don't speak up. I came previous to landing here at Macy's, and I came from healthcare, where I spent the majority of my career. And in an industry like that, where you are dealing with people's lives, it can literally make or break a situation.
mm.
But to truly foster creativity and innovation and to make work just enjoyable, you have to create an environment of like safety no matter where you are. And, as we're sharing, leaders set the tone for how their employees experience work. And that includes how free you feel to share thoughts, ideas, opinions, and feelings. And that's why, in many ways, I do feel like psych safety is very much intimately connected with leaders who demonstrate empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It can totally make you question if you're in the right place, and it can hit your confidence and also affect your own self-trust, can trigger imposter syndrome thoughts and feelings, and
Mhm.
subsequently your behavior in the workplace. You might retreat, as we've talked about, you might hold back. not
Hmm.
showcasing your talent, as we've touched on. Then you might overcompensate by overworking, engaging in perfectionism in an attempt to make up for what you now have potentially perceived as a lack of knowledge or ability. The other thing I wanted to bring up as well is like part of psychological safety is that sense of belonging. And I'm sure as, a woman of color, that has probably factored into, your considerations around psychological safety, microaggressions, against
Hmm.
people of color, people who don't speak English, as their first language, people who are from the LGBTQIA plus. Sorry, I'm
Plus.
very good at saying that community. People who identify in different ways, and it's all about that acceptance, isn't it? And like obviously, I haven't experienced any microaggressions on that level, apart from being female and
Hmm.
white. But female and white against white male patriarchy, who cares, right? But
Right.
anyway,
Right.
but it happens. But I know that personally each of these experiences that I went through had chipped away at my confidence, and in the end I just didn't trust myself enough to take senior roles because I felt like if I did that I would be too exposed, which is a
Mm.
shame because as we've mentioned a couple of times now, everyone loses that way when your talent don't perform at what they can do.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I think so to speak to the experience of a woman of color,
Mm,
and I've shared this before multiple times, growing up in an Indian household, we were raised with you don't challenge or question
mm,
people who are authority or in authority roles.
yeah,
You listen to what they're saying, they know they're wise or you think they're wise and they know better
yeah,
and or it was just so that's sort of the messaging that we're raised with, and then you get into the workplace and people are like, oh, you have to be vocal, you have to speak up,
mm,
and then of course when you try to in a very delicate and maybe diplomatic way because you're trying to remember the lessons your parents have taught you, then it becomes, oh, you're made to shut down. So maybe my parents were right and I shouldn't be speaking up to begin with. And that
mm,
only then, to go back to imposter syndrome,
yeah,
really does perpetuate that vicious cycle of doubting yourself. Oh, I'm definitely not, capable or worthy to share those ideas because one, my parents told me I shouldn't, and two, I'm being shut down. So it's still a lose-lose for me. You
yeah.
know, of course, I didn't know what imposter syndrome was at the time. So all these thoughts and feelings are just swirling in my head. It's really a recipe for a disaster.
Yeah, true. I mean, also just to add to that, even I grew up in a white household and I was taught not to speak
Oh
because,
my gosh, interesting.
well, because girls would say they're not heard, right? And
Of
to be in
course.
authority. So, I mean, a lot of just to kind of add to that, a lot of women do experience that, and that's why they don't speak up. That's why they lack that confidence. So it's a
Right.
societal, unconscious bias, I suppose, as well, that we're all battling against. Anyway, it's time for us to speak
I-
up. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why we're talking about this topic today, because when you create an environment to be psychologically safe, essentially what you're doing is you're establishing that open communication where you
Mm,
can share ideas and thoughts without fear.
mm,
You're encouraging your team to take risks, which we know you need to do for any company to grow, develop, and be competitive,
yep.
right?
Yep.
You're creating an environment that's supportive for everyone. So you're enjoying your workplace and not just going to work and performing a task.
Sense of
Um,
belonging, yes.
yeah, the belonging piece.
Yeah,
And you're fostering an environment of trust and collaboration, which again, teams perform better when they are trusting of each other and they
yeah.
can collaborate more effectively.
Mm,
And all of this is also, helping your team to share constructive feedback, which just helps everyone develop and strengthen their skill set.
mm,
So all of these contribute to the kind of work environment that helps everyone feel seen,
mhm,
valued, heard, and like they belong. Key
mhm,
point there. It
mhm.
also allows people to show up just as themselves, so when you feel like, in a way that you're not going to be judged and you're setting up a team for thinking creatively and outside the box. But I will say that just because your environment may be psychologically safe, it doesn't mean you don't have conflict or that you avoid conflict. In fact, when you have a psychologically safe environment, you address conflict in a healthy way, which is what we need so we can fully collaborate with each other.
Yeah, I mean, we have to understand that it really is about belonging, connection, because as humans, we
Hmm.
really need that. We crave that. And I see a lot of
Hmm.
this everywhere, actually. I see that theme in a lot of what people struggle with when you kind of, it's off topic, but I was watching some documentary the other day, and it was about someone who had a drug addiction. And at the core of it, I could see that what they really craved was belonging and connection. Right.
Mm.
So I see a lot of this in what goes on with humans, and I'm actually kind of really get it, like seeing it, that theme so everywhere. So anyway, back on topic. So creating an environment where we could be curious and explore in a way that allows us to feel connected and that we belong is really key, because the minute you don't feel connected and that you belong, you're going to start engaging in destructive, sabotaging behaviors, right?
Right.
And we've seen it, and that's what we've been talking about. And that you're right there about conflict, because conflict doesn't need to be negative, right? We can have healthy
Hmm.
conflict where it's okay to have a different opinion, and from someone else, and by accepting that people do have different opinions. I did a program last year on positive intelligence, and there was a concept within that framework about how to manage and have healthy conflict, which was that, whatever situation you're in, and this is a real game changer. This is a game changer for me. It really helped me, actually. But whatever situation you are in, where you're in a kind of dichotomy of this is what I think, and this is what you think, and I'm right kind of thing, which happens a lot, as we know, right? Because
Hmm.
likes to be right. Cons- Consider that perhaps 10% of what the other person's saying is right, and 10% of what you're saying might be wrong, right? Well, not wrong, but maybe they've got a point, right? It's basically
Right.
it, right. So trying to find some sort of 10% healthy ground, like what is the 10% that they might be right and I might be wrong, like
Hmm.
look for that, because that then opens up curiosity, fresh perspectives, and it brings consideration into what that person's talking about. So you're not buying into that whole dichotomy where people get angry, they walk away angry because I'm right, you're wrong, right? And so we know life has gray areas. So look for that 10% gray area, I think.
Oh, I love that. What a great perspective to consider the 10% of what might be. I'm
Mm.
realizing this kind of mindset allows you to look at those situations of conflict with more curiosity as opposed to, I need to win this type of attitude. I'm definitely going to add this to my
Oh,
toolkit.
yeah, it's fantastic, because I actually used it in a situation where I was super angry about something, and I went, all right,
Mm,
what is the 10%? And
right.
it really calmed me down, and it made me have a whole different perspective on that situation. So yeah,
Wow.
recommend that tool.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've talked about our experiences with
Mm,
psychologically safe environments, or rather the lack thereof. Now let's talk about how you can create a healthy workplace where everyone feels free to share.
mm,
In this way, we said this before, but leaders really set the tone for a psychologically safe environment. So cultivating an environment of empathy, respect, support, as well as letting your team know and feeling it, because
mm,
employees have to feel it, that you value them, their
yeah,
contributions and input goes a really long way.
yeah,
And this idea goes hand in hand with what I shared about but encouraging open communication. So your team knows to speak up at any point, and that's really crucial for collaboration.
yeah,
I will add here also being honest about mistakes. Listen, we are all human, we are all fallible, and there are times when we as leaders do make mistakes. Yes, it can happen. But that is why it's important to admit them, acknowledge that, and learn from it. And by doing that, you're also modeling that appropriate behavior to your team.
yeah. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, right? So failure shouldn't be viewed as something you did wrong, unless, of course, you really did something wrong. And I'm talking about illegal here, but we all mess up, right? Making mistakes
Right.
is part of the learning curve, and that means that when we allow for that to happen, people feel safe to take calculated risks, to experiment
Mhm.
with ideas, rather than holding back, not doing anything, not saying anything in this quest to be perfect and accepted and belong, because the fact is, if you're not making mistakes here and there, you're probably not trying hard enough. So
Mm.
let's embrace a culture of learning over perfection.
Yeah, cheers to that.
Mm.
Mistakes can be our best teachers if we are looking to grow and evolve. Wherever you are in your career journey, our hope is that you can take away these insights from this episode. Psychological safety is important for all workplace cultures to foster creativity and innovation. That doesn't mean you don't address conflict. You do, but in a healthy way so that everyone is seen, heard, and valued. And leaders set that tone. So make sure you are modeling the behavior you want your team to replicate and show up authentically with respect, empathy, and support for everyone.
Yeah, great. And don't be afraid to explore and embrace a culture of learning that incorporates mistakes as part of the process.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. If we can leave you with a thought, how can you create a psychologically safe workplace within your team? If you liked this episode, we would be so grateful if you can share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you can rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. So subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Stay tuned for another great episode in 2 weeks.
Until then, stay sassy. Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.